Now, to help with the connection stability, we'll just get you to kindly turn off your videos just to help maintain the actual internet connection for everybody. So welcome everyone, or welcome back if you joined us for the first lecture in January. Thanks for your attendance today for this second lecture in this new online lecture series, Agency in the First Intermediate Period. This series is a vital component of a new Marie Curie Actions funded postdoctoral research project examining the impact of political and climate change on women's agency, a social power analysis. Covering dynasties 7 through to 11, this project focuses on the first intermediate period, a transformative era in Egyptian history. This time saw significant social and political shifts, including regional political conflict, civil war, foreign immigration, environmental issues, and a widespread reversal of fortune that fundamentally altered the established social hierarchy. The first intermediate period is no longer seen as Egypt's first dark age, but rather as a transformative era. It brought increased prosperity to non-elites, greater cultural complexity, demonstrating both continuity and creative adaptation and advanced expression of selfhood across all social levels. Despite significant research on this critical period, the lives of women during this time remain a largely unexplored area. While historical research has yielded insights into first intermediate period women, through their burials and biographical inscriptions, published studies of these inscriptions tend to concentrate on exceptional figures or are incorporated into larger analyses of Old and Middle Kingdom women. This project aims to address this gap by exclusively examining the lives of women during the first intermediate period. By analysing a broader spectrum of the female population, including those from previously marginalised social levels, this research will leverage the unique archaeological and epigraphical record of this period to offer novel perspectives. To inform this project, the online lecture series, featuring 4 presentations over the full year, will explore various aspects of agency during the first intermediate period and beyond. Distinguished scholars such as today's speaker, Dr. Dana Belahukovka, sorry if I did that wrong, will share their expertise on diverse topics relevant to this project. The purpose of this series is to enrich colleagues, students, and the general public's understanding of this crucial period. Each lecture will be recorded and made available on the Czech Institute of Egyptology YouTube channel for future viewing. We are in for a real treat today with my dear friend and colleague Dana, who will share her recent findings from her PhD. Although Dana's research period is later than the first intermediate period, I invited her to present because of the unique insights she identified through studying titles from the New Kingdom. As much of my research focuses also on women's titles, the opportunity to learn from Dana's title study is an invaluable opportunity to showcase how titles can provide insight into the society and culture of ancient Egypt. For those who do not yet know Dana, her main field of interest is the New Kingdom Egypt, especially archaeology, gender studies, art history, and religious and profane texts of this period. Since her BA studies, she specialises in royal ideology and the legitimisation of power based on detailed studies of royal and elite tombs, temples, and biographies. Her dissertation deals with the topic of female participants in the cult at the Institution of Musical Performers. I'm going to stop sharing now and I'm just going to let this other person in, and then we can hand it over. There we go. I'll close that. I'll keep looking on there. I'm going to stop sharing. There you go, Dana. The floor's all yours. Go ahead. Thanks again for coming today.
Thank you, Sue. Good morning, everybody. I hope that you can see my presentation. Sue, is it okay?
Yes, I can see it fine. Any problems with sound or image, please just put a note in the chat and I can keep an eye on that. But it's fine from my point of view.
Thank you. And before I will start, I will have just a small disclaimer. I'm now recording this from my home, which I have two cats living with me. So there is a big possibility that you will see paw here and there. So please ignore that. They are very, very social. So I will start with my talk now. This talk is based on my dissertation, which I defended last year. Parts of it were already published in my articles, but I don't think that everybody already read them, therefore I will explain conclusions of them. I would like to continue to develop conclusions from my thesis in the future postdoctoral period, therefore please consider my conclusion as a work in progress. These conclusions are based on the material which I studied for my thesis, and it is possible that with more material, my views would change. The thesis' main goal was to explain what was Henner in the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom as a time frame was chosen deliberately, and why I will say later. Let me first start from the beginning. And I don't know how to move here. Sorry. Yes. We start with the word Khener and how it got into the Egyptology. Khener, translated as a harem, was first used by an inventive scholar, Theodule Charles de Veria, author of the first translation of the so-called Turin Judicial Papyrus, which belonged to the set of the papyri dealing with malevolent act, not specified in the text itself, but aimed at the king Ramesses III. Within the papyrus text, Theodore de Veria come across with the word unknown with unknown meaning. We must keep in our minds that Egyptian lexicon and grammar was still developing at the time. De Veria worked with this text only a few decades after the hieroglyphs have been deciphered. Today's standard publication used for the work with text has not been written yet. The first problematic word Deveria discussed was word Hener, and he translated it as a harem. In his publication, he argues for his interpretation extensively, dedicated an entire chapter to the issue of Egyptian harem. He sorted the attestation of the word into the three groups. What happened here? As you can see here, first of them agrees with the latest standard interpretation of the hieratic signs, and I agree with his interpretation. The second group is much more questionable. De Veria transcribed it in hieratics as with different classifiers compared to the previous group. He connected the last two signs into the different ligature, which he interpreted as a hieroglyph A1 from the Gardiner silence, sitting man, with the plural strokes, and he argues that there is no difference in the depiction of the seated man and the woman in hieratic script. Therefore, his interpretation of the second group looks like you see in the presentation. Nowadays, better technology allows us to see parts of the papyrus in detail. It is evident that the sign's appearance is the same as the signs in the first group. Therefore, there is no ligature, as De Veria presumed. The third group is the most problematic one. De Veria interpreted the upper sign as a consonant T and the two strokes as a sign for sitting female again. Even though the transcription can be debated, the signs cannot be transcribed as a De Veria proposed. The upper sign could be consonant T, but the lower one is not clear. Nevertheless, it can represent simply two strokes. The classifiers are crucial because De Veria built an entire theory on them. Regarding the meaning of this word, he started with the first one, namely the sign per, that indicates a locus. The word refers to the place or a building. Then he moved to the reconstructed signs of the seating female. Together he reads the word as a place where the women lived, ginecum, or as he says more often, harem. Hence, as several classifiers with a problematic reading became a major argument for the concept of the harem, and this harem was brought to the ancient Egyptian historiography like this. Since he understood the word as a harem, he went on to define what this institution looked like and how it's supposed to operate it. He defines the royal harem as a place where women were detained and separated from the outer world. The status of these women was not clear to him, but he stated that they were probably slaves or maybe even a normal persons. He built his interpretation mostly on general information on supposed function of the Muslim harem, which in fact he didn't understood because he didn't have access to it. Then he stated that in ancient Egypt it must function very similarly. He interprets the plot of the papyrus itself as a murder of the king by his harem because it is usually what happens in the harem, and the identification of the harem is lately explained by the plot because murder of the king usually happens in the royal harem. Therefore, I think that we can say that Deveria's fascination with the concept of the harem is rather evident, and let him propose the circular argument just shown. Moreover, we can say the translation of Perhener as a harem does not stand on the solid ground, and it was very influenced by the time fashionable Orientalism. However, his translation has been adopted in all contemporary works, and it is only one which appeared in the edition of Bertrebuch, whereby it was canonized. Even though at least there was one voice against this interpretation, and it was the article written by Blackman in 1921. The departure of the translation of the word Hener as a harem was designed by Del Norte in 1981. She came with translation musical performance, which was accepted by other scholars, for example, Bessie Bryan. Based on the study of visual culture, Del Norte defines a harem as a group of performers consisted by dancers, singers, clappers of both genders. Since the New Old Kingdom, Henner was proper performance and were responsible for participating in three types of rituals: funeral rituals, where they were part of the funerary estates, cult of the goddesses and gods, and royal ceremonies. Thus, since 1980s, there has been discussion and inclination that Kenner cannot be translated as a harem. However, the term is still frequently used, and even in the reprint of the Lescau's last Egyptian dictionary, for example, we encounter only one translation for this entry, and that's harem, partly because there is the tendency to distinguish between the institution of Kenner in pre-New Kingdom period and the New Kingdom period. The argument is therefore based on the fact that in New Kingdom we have documented polygamy among rulers who had several foreign women, in addition to Egyptian queens. The lack of the data about the organization of the royal court and the presence of the foreign women could lead to the simplified theory placing these women into some general harem, and hence the tendency to translate term Hener in the New Kingdom as such. Therefore, here is the Orientalistic paradigm still standing for New Kingdom. And as I announced in the beginning, it is the reason why the time frame on my thesis is very important. The question is there really need to see this institution differently for Old, Middle, and New Kingdom? To answer this, the remain part of the presentation will try to answer questions such as what is Hener in your kingdom? Connected questions are what did Hener in the new kingdom, and who were members of this institution? I am now stepping back for the little bit with looking into the topic of women in the cult through the iconography, since, as was already mentioned, in Old and Middle Kingdom, Henet was involved in ritual. If there is continuity between these two periods, we should as well look into it. I will start with few quotes. The first one comes from the Lexicon de Egyptologie, where it's written that by the New Kingdom, the priesthood has become more isolated, professional, functional, from which the laity were excluded, and it is doubtless for this reason that priestly titles as such were rarely applied to the women. Or from the book of Emily Tite on priesthood, although ancient Egypt is well known for its gender equality, women did not play an active role as men in the temple establishment. And the last one, in the order to play this role, priest, as a person have to be vab or pure, and it seems likely that at some other point, it was decided that women's bodily functions, namely childbirth and menstruation, rendered them unsuitable for this role. In my opinion, these statements are again more we think influenced by our own culture than the ancient Egyptian ones, by Christian view that who, when, and was involved in the rituals. When dealing with ancient Egyptian priesthood, it's always good to start with the mythology, namely with Menfi cosmology according to pyramid text PT 1248, where the masturbation of the main god played the most important role in the creation of the world. It is believed that Hathor was present in the god Amun's deed of masturbation. She is represented as Atum's hand. This symbolic representation lays the foundation for the subsequent roles assigned to earthly rulers. In this methodological framework, the king embodies the masculine principle of the earth, often represented by gods like Horus or Ra, while the queen symbolizes the feminine aspects associated with the goddess like Hathor or Mut. As an earthly embodiment, the male principle, the king also functions as a high priest of the land, overseeing the religious rituals. In examining my topic from the broader perspective, it becomes evident that, according to methodology and ideology, the ideal figures to perform any ritual were king and the queen, symbolizing the essential female and male duality within the overreaching concept, because it is always about duality in as the most things in ancient Egypt are. However, due to the king's role as head of the kingdom, his omnipresence was impractical. To address this, the high priest assumed the responsibility of the performing ritual as a king representative. Who was the queen's representative, I asked. Let's look now on what priests did in ancient Egypt during New Kingdom. Priesthood was a relatively stringent organizational structure for temple priests began to emerge, marked by a clearly defined hierarchy. This hierarchy includes positions such as high priest, second to fourth prophet, va priest, in addition to other roles within the cult, such as sem priest, lector priest, among others. This hierarchical structure followed a system of fields which has its origin in the Old Kingdom. Each field served for months before being succeeded by another. It was the priest responsible to manage and present offering within the temple as an integral part of the daily temple ritual. Similarly, in the context of funerary practices, the priest played a pivotal role in overseeing the presentation of the offerings dedicated to deceased. Furthermore, the priest's duties extend to the chanting the liturgy, a sacred aspect of both temple rituals and funerals. This multi-functional role demonstrated by priest centrality in religious practices and ceremonies. With this knowledge, I will turn to the iconography to show you in which context the women of the New Kingdom are depicted and if we can help us to understand their roles. Starting with the funeral scenes, the funeral procession served as a symbolic reenactment portraying the deceased transition to the Western realms and their connection to the divine entities. In this context of these rituals, women assume a pivotal role, symbolizing the manifestation of deities such as Isis and Nephthys. Additionally, a group of mourners representing two birds into which Isis and Nephthys were believed to be reincarnated were also present in these ceremonies when mourning Osiris, as you can see here. There are also special occasions, as can be observed in the tomb of Kinamun, which illustrates the occasion of the statues of the tomb owner being transported. This tomb features procession with statues, consistently accompanied by a group of musicians, dancers, and priests. In two instances, the destination station is represented as a simplified plain facade adorned with offerings. Additionally, one register showcases an intricately detailed false door with the pile of offerings placed before it, which is believed to show an act of bringing the statues to the tomb. rather than into the temple. As you can clearly see, involvement of the female and male participants in the ritual. Turning our attention to the Khonsu, known as To, we encounter the family deeply involved in religious ceremonies. The tomb of Khonsu features numerous depictions of the women holding sistrum during various religious ceremonies. Their presence is intentional, as these women were part of the Khonsu's family and held the titles chantresses for different deities. The tomb's owner, Khonsu himself, held the esteemed position as a high priest of Montu. As such, this tomb represents not only the final resting place of a high priest, but also for his family, all of whom were actively involved in the service of this deity. This familiar background likely served as an inspiration for depicting numerous religious events, ensuring that the female members of the family were prominently included in these depictions. The broader scene encompasses two registers of individuals engaged in religious ritual before piles of offerings, illustrating the worship of deity within the veiled shrine and appears to float on the Nile. The tomb's owner, who is bringing bouquet to the offering pile, is accompanied by the group of four women. They hold incense burners, systems, and actively participating in the ritual before the offering, and they are identified as the owner's daughters. There is one very compelling scene where the woman is actively participating as a chantress or priestesses in the procession, specifically during the commemorative procession honoring the ruler Tutmosis III. And as you can see, there's this kind of enigmatic picture where she is kind of consecrating the nails filled with the offering. In the tomb of Amenmose Titi 90, we encounter comparable scene. Like Khonsuto, Amenmose also served as a priest in the mortuary court of the ruler, in this case Amenhotep I. His wife, Yui, also played a role in this cult as a great of performers. In this tomb, the sacred bark is accompanied by a procession of the both male and female priests. Though the scene has suffered damage, it is still possible to discern the entire group of the Amenmose leading the way. He is attired in same priest holding as incense burner. Following him are likely three male figures, again representing priests. Subsequently, a group is approximately 10 women follows, with Yuri bearing the title of Great of Performers of the Amenhotep I, and their forefront shaking a sistrum. Behind her, three more sistrum players are accompanied by smaller scale depiction of the girl playing clappers. A group of female musicians comes next. The representation of the latter group is rather minimal, and identifying individual instruments are occasionally very challenging. Another very interesting example is from Akhmenu Festival Hall, constructed by Tutmosis III at Karnak. A series of chapels occupies the northern parts. There is on the western wall, the scene commands a doorway with the depiction of the goddess seated on the throne, positioned before the offering table. The king approaches this goddess, purifying the pile of the offerings before her. Tutmosis III offerings to goddess is accompanied by a trio of female figures who clapped rhythmically as indicated by their gestures. These two registers are separated by describing the scene's purpose, bringing the statues to be purified. Susan Ornstein believes that these scenes represent both morning and evening ritual, and notably women were part of these ceremonies. Regardless of the specific nature of this ritual, what stands out is intriguing presence of the group of female musician priests immediately behind the king. This positioning suggested their esteemed status within the temple hierarchy. Moreover, their proximity to the high-ranking priests who were in the state of ritual purity is significant. They find themselves at the very heart of the temple, a location reserved for the sacred activities. This depiction raised the possibility that these women actively participating in the ritual purification of the ruler's statues. It also hints at their access to the most sacred section of the temple, typically restricted to the purified one. This suggests that priestesses might too have been granted entry into these exclusive areas. In the tomb of Amenemhat, TT 82, the chapel's south wall features the depiction of the feast of the goddess Hathor. This scene follows other associated with the representation of the offering to the deceased. The scenes of the Hathor feast is partly damaged, with several priestesses holding menad necklaces and sistra. Three of these priestesses have been partially preserved, while it is believed that additional figures were originally part of the scene which has not survived. Each of the characters is accompanied by the inscription positioned in front of them. The published translation provided by Davis at Gardiner reads female musicians and followed by the deity and his epithets. However, it's worth noting that the written form of this title does not precisely align with the 18th dynasty original. An alternative translation that aligns with the original 18th dynasty writing is as follows. Pronouns for, such as pronouns for Amun, Lord of the Thrones of the Two Lands, Chief of Gods, pronouns for Great Ennead, which is in elect of places, and pronouns for Hathor, Lady of Dernera, admits all God. To conclude this section, the iconographic analysis represent here reveals several noteworthy points. First, it is evident that women played an active role in various rituals, contributing significantly through their performance. Their contribution were multifaceted, as illustrated by their participation in the recitation of saying, liturgy, as I show in the last example. Not only did women contribute by reciting these things, but they also played a pivotal role in setting the rhythm. Beyond this, women were active participants in the ritual themselves, engaging through the dance and acrobatics. Women were also depicted in close proximity to the king. In Akhmenu, their positioning even surpasses that of the priests, underscoring their elevated status within temple hierarchy. Furthermore, the depiction of the Akhmenu strongly suggests that some women not only held this esteemed position but also enjoy access to the innermost sacrificed areas of the temple, typically reserved exclusively for the purified individuals. If Ornstein's interpretation is accurate, it may be inferred that may have taken part of the mourning ritual, a daily occurrence as the name implies. This evidence suggests that their involvement in the temple ritual extends beyond special events such as Opet festival and indicates a daily commitment, them being the permanent staff members of the temple. These findings contradicts Titus' assertion. Since we established at the beginning that priesthood was organized hierarchically, there is the question if the female part of the clergy was also organized as such. For the head of it, there is a title which is spokeswoman, and that's God's wife. The title God's wife, Hemet Necher, was exclusively held by the female members of the royal family during the New Kingdom. Ahmose Nefertari, the daughter and sister of the king, and likely posthumously Ahmose Ahotep, Queen Ahotep assumed this role as the first holders of these titles. The list and numbers of the female holders of this title in 18th dynasty remains subject of ongoing debate. It is still unclear whether some royal women even held this title. The situation is further complicated by the scarcity of sources and the frequent sharing of the names among the royal women. The god's wife, typically royal women, participated in various rituals along the king. Several ritual activities associated with god's wives are including: she attended liturgies alongside the godfather or high priest. She purified herself before the ritual in sacred lakes, as did the rest of the priesthood. She was allowed to enter the temple private parts, including the main sanctuary. She recited offering lists as a part of the daily food offering as a high priest. She burned wax figures representing the enemy of the god and thus maintained the Ma'at. and Shirata the sister before Amun. The title God's wife is notably absent from the royal females within the court of Amenhotep III. The absence of any known holder of this title is accentuated by the discovery of the donation stela, a pivotal document that established this institution broken into the three parts within the third pylon of the Karnak, which was constructed by Amenhotep III. The question arises regarding this interpretation of this absence. Typically, it would be desirable for such stela to be displayed prominently and to be visible to the king's subjects. The destruction of it and placement it within the body of the pylon suggested a disruption of the established tradition. Was it no longer deemed relevant as the title remained unoccupied and it has lost its significance in the royal ideology? Additionally, why did the office go unoccupied for the extended period of the time? Interesting phenomenon during the time when the god's wife was not occupied was the position of the women from non-royal background with the title Veret Hener, the title for which second part of this lecture will be dedicated. If you can see the time frame during the reign of Thutmose I was the last known god's wife documented. From them, the change on the non-royal level on one stands to encounter women with the title Veret Hener, which I translate according to Del Norte as a grade of musical performance. It is then imagined that the female role in the ritual in which royal women performed began to delegate it to the non-royal person who was a holder of this specific title. In the same manner that high priest represented the king in the occultic cults, did this wife with the title Great of Performance represent the female component in the ritual, namely the queen. The occurrences of the individual titles on the timeline also corresponds with the scheme. Subsequently, at the time when the title God's Wife is not documented, there are holders of the title Great of Performers. Another indication or circumstantial evidence that the duties of the God's Wife could have been carried out by the woman with the title Great of Performance when the title has not been occupied are the titles of the Queen Ahmose Nefertari. She bears the title God's wife in the sources that date from her lifetime. However, the title Great of Performers is also attested for her, but only on more recent monuments created after her death. This indicates that she never held this title during her lifetime. The question is why it is attributed to her on monuments which were created long time after her death. We do not have direct data to answer this question. However, a solution is being offered. At the time when the newer monuments were created, the activities with which she was associated with were performed by women with the title Great of Performers. Thus, there was a kind of updating her titulature, so the title would agree with the reality when the later monuments were created. The beginning of the 19th dynasty may offer another indirect confirmation of the fact that the meaning of the title God's wife has been emptied. Or it may also be said to provide evidence that the title was not sufficient to make the queen to the king's ritual partner in the ritual. There is evidence that some queens held the title God's wife at the same time there was a large number of the women with the title Great of Performance. Moreover, some royal wives also carried the title Great of Performance. Therefore, we can assume that the practice of earlier periods continued to operate in a certain fashion. When the king and queen were represented in the temple ritual on special occasions as an opet, uh, they were taking this title, and on the routine basis, by the high priest and the great of performance, these rituals were performed. It is therefore possible to imagine the system in which, in regular operation, the high priest and his wife were responsible for the performance of rituals, and when the king exceptionally performed the ceremony, he was accompanied by his royal woman who carried the title Great of Performance to represent the necessary female component of the ritual. Now we will switch to the question who, and I will speak mainly about the title Veret Hener now. When I started researching the Hener in the New Kingdom, one fact was quite obvious, and that was the fact that entire institution is best represented in the sources as through the holders of the title Heveret Hener, grade of musical performance, who led this institution. This title took the form of Veret Hener, and behind the N is always the name of the god or goddesses. The main focus, apart from the finding out as much data as possible about the holders, which is limited by the fact that they were usually mentioned within the monuments of their family members, or is on the titles that, or this was limited mostly on the titles that they were held, what called themselves, and what was their family background. Now I will introduce the corpus and show the statistics about these titles. From the statistical point of view, we can state that the biggest part of the holders of this title are known only from one source, mainly 66%. Related to this is the fact that we do not know much about the fates apart from the name title and basic information. Small part from are known from two and more occurrences, namely 44%. Most women were represented in the tombs, either their own or of their families, specifically 40%. The second source are statues and stelas only for 14% of documented titles holders. 20% of sources were miscellaneous. This is the chronology of the title. Individual holders of the title Veret Hener could be associated with different cults. However, what is reflected here is both of the fact that the most extensively studied site for this period are Thebes, but also probably the fact that Ammon was the state deity, since a large number of the women studied were tied to his cult. Among other cults we have had their title holders can be mentioned, for example, Mut, Montu, Ra, Hathor, Osiris, Anhor, but also the deified king as Amenhotep I and Tutankhamun. There are also three females where the cult is not specified at all. The distribution of the cult across of the title across the country is also influenced by preserving and examining the individual centers. As might be expected, we have most of our data from Thebes. The second is another religious center, namely Abydos, and then we have centers such as Akhmin, Menopher, etc. The rest of the country is represented only by one lady. At this point, it is important to mention that it is not the main number of the women from each era, but the evidence that there were some, for it proves that the position Beret Henner was not only connected with the cult such as Thebes or Abydos. The fact that we have women with this title also from the smaller religious centers and local cults, it is important finding. With a bit of exaggeration, it can be stated that it is very likely that every major local temple had the institution Hener, and that this Hener was led by Bere Hener, although there is an evidence for 13 such as localities. Concerning the family background, there is not inconsiderable number of the women where the husband is not mentioned at all, namely 5 of them. But suppose that single women in ancient time were not common as they are in today's world. Therefore, it's a better explanation to seems to be that this was also the case in the monuments where the man was not mentioned as evidence for the high status of the woman. The status was so high that she had such resources that she could, for example, had a tomb built or be given by the king to her, that and she doesn't want to commemorate anyone else that herself, as could be expected in the wet nurse of Tutankhamun, who was also a great of performance called Maya, or a statue of the Hui, where she is depicted here with the royal kids, and her daughter was queen. So her husband was not the one who gave her the biggest prestige, not as big as her as a wet nurse and the mother of the queen. The great of performers was the most often wife of the high priest. 45% from the studied women were wives of the high priest of the same cult. These are the also two queens and two wives of the kings of the Kash. Together, as 83% of the spouses have the same position, some position in the cult. From the statistic and material, it can be stated that they were only one holder of this title in one time for one cult. The holder was usually somehow connected to the priests of the given cult, usually the wife of the high priest, sometimes of the priest of a lesser priest. Studied women came from the Egyptian elite families. Usually, the family had some background in the cult, and parents were holders of the priestly titles. Many such of examples are also offered in two case studies, which I will show, and it's first of them is called Abydos family, as you can see here. The first mentioned Abydos family is a large family, the core of which is known found from Abydos. That's why I call it them as such. And you can see family tree here. We have data about 6 generations of this large family. It is probably a time period covering from the reign of the Haremheb to Meremtah. It is evident that most of their members were tied to the regional cults. However, there are also holders of the title of Wazir, King's sons of Kash, or overseer of the treasury. This family was involved in the 8 different cults, usually at the highest post, that is the post of a high priest, and wives holding the post of great of performance. And you can see very clearly here that there is always couple high priest and the great of performance. The second family is family of Lady Tachat, family which is quite extensive again, but they serve to one cult, and it is cult of Amun. The time frame for this family is expected to be from Tut Akhenaton to Ramesses II. And I published an article about this family if you are interested in reading it. As for obtaining the titles, I will show it in few examples. For example, Buyabi from Abydos family, and you can see only part of the family tree here, was a daughter of the high priest of Osiris, Nefer, and the great of the performers of Osiris, T. And she married into the family of the priest of Anhur. So therefore, we can say that the predisposition for the giving this title was that woman was born into the priestly family, where her mother already held this title. And can be also speculated that in some cases the female inherited from her mother, grandmother, or sister. Such an example can be seen in the family of the high priest of Amun, Nebnecheru, whose wife Beritre was great of performance of Amun. The daughter T was in their tomb marked by the same title. Nevertheless, the husband of her is not mentioned at all. It is therefore possible that she was still very young when the tomb was decorated and she was not married. Therefore, the title could be inherited from her mother, and the reason why she given it was not that she married some high priest. Very often, the female was from the priestly family where several generations were involved in the local cult, and then she was married to another priesthood family and obtained the title Veretchener of the different cult. There is example where the woman is not from the priesthood background at all, and here it is, for example, a lady from the Abydos family, Lady T, who you can see here. And she was daughter of the head of the granaries, Kenna and Mrs. Via. She herself, therefore, have after that title Great of Performance of Osiris because she married into this family and her husband was high priest of the Osiris. We don't know much about the individual fates of these women. There are, however, a few cases from which we can reconstruct what the career of women holding offices might theoretically have looked like. Merit, wife of the Sobek may be the example where her career can be at least partially reconstructed. It can be divided into two phases. The first one was in Fayum, where she was a great of performance of Sobek, and her husband was a high priest of the same cult. The second phase is associated with the couple elevation to the court, where her husband held the office of treasurer and she became royal nurse, and they have to move from Fayum. It is probably very similar with another woman called Lady Tahat, who after her husband's elevation changed not only her place of the resident but also the deity she served as a great of performance. She was from this very prominent Theban family associated with the Amun. Her husband was from very prominent family from Dendera, and he held the position of high priest of Hathor, and she is in the family tomb marked as a chantress of Amun. Then we have her from another source as a great of performance of Hathor when she married her husband and became the height of great of performance in Dendera. But her husband was elevated to Karnak and became a high priest of Amun, and then therefore she held also the title great of performance of the same temple. I hope that from my presentation it is clear that translation Veret Hener or Hener as a harem never stood on the solid ground. I believe that it is through the analyzing the documents of the women who work in this institution that we can get more accurate view of what Hener was. The evidence I try to present here shows that Hener was an institution that was tied to the local temple. It was headed by high-ranking women, usually wife of the high priest, since it included professionals such as dancers, singers, and percussionists, and it is also evident in the depiction of Opet festival on the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut that they were integral part of the ritual, namely its performative components. Veretchener were, however, not slave girls or harem women as Deveriam imagined them, quite the opposite. They were members of the highest echelon of Egyptian society who came from families that have been associated with the cult for generations. An interesting example, the Abydos family, is the one about we have more data, illustrates the tendency of marriage among other priestly families. It shows the hegemony of the family over the cults in southern parts of the country, which was achieved throughout intermarriages, in which women play a significant role. The fact that the high priest had a partner who oversaw performative part of the ritual is very crucial. It shows that the high priest and his wife together were responsible for the running the cult. I call this phenomenon parallel careers of the spouses, which is the topic I would like to concentrate upon in the future. Whereas Hener therefore was a head of the institution Hener, where the female part of the ritual was concentrated. It is an institution which can be described as an umbrella organization where women with various titles as chantresses, singers, dancers, and sister players belong and were overseen by the grade of performance. These women were, as men, also organized into the fila system. The structure of Henner probably looked like on the screen. To challenge the statement from the beginning of this talk, I would like to say that women were part of the ritual. I would not be ashamed to call them even priestesses. Therefore, if we stop looking into these females as a mere singers and dancers, we can see that they play a crucial part in the ritual, and the whole ritual would not be possible without them. And with looking more into the connection of male and female careers, we could find out that women were much more involved in everything that we think. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dana. What a Fascinating and interesting. Excuse me. Interesting talk. Everyone, if you would like to now unmute, we'll have some time for any questions. Um, Thanks for stopping that sharing. Has anybody got any questions or comments they would like to make? Just feel free to unmute and ask Dana directly. No need to be shy. I would, while
So
people
long.
think,
I'm sorry. Was so long, sorry.
no, not at all. While people are thinking about that, a couple of takeaway points that I came away from was that, especially your identification of, the women being in the inner sanctuary. This is something that many older reports always deny that women have that ability to gain access to there. So I really found that really fascinating and really quite joyous to hear it. And even to hear that she was, cleansing herself in the sacred lake. Do you have more than one example of any other females actually purifying in the sacred lake, or that's just an extrapolation out from the data you've got?
I have only these two examples, but it doesn't mean that there are none. I just haven't found it yet.
Yeah, exactly. It's really fascinating. I'm just trying to bring the view up so I can see the gallery. Who else is trying to? Okay, questions when you message. Anik says, thank you very much, and is writing an article on this topic in the third intermediate period. And I would send you a copy of it as soon as it's published. So you've got somebody else out there who's doing very similar sort of research, which is really interesting. Anything else anybody else would like to? I'm just trying to bring the gallery up. I don't know what I've done. I don't know what I've done with my poor little view today. Multi-speaker. Well, I've certainly broken the images. Okay, so if no one's got any questions, you can, of course, contact Dana directly. This has been recorded and it will be, I'm just going to share
There is
my,
one. I
yep,
asked.
go for it.
No, I just saw that.
I'm just going back. I was going to, um, okay, Sonia, thank you so much. It was such an waiting to read every publication you publish about this subject. When are you publishing it?
I already published 3 articles about that. If you can email me, I can send it to you. And I'll now have just gave Professor Barta another one for publication, and this one I don't know when it will be out. But if you reach me by email, I will definitely send it to you. I will just type
You
it.
might actually put your email address in the chat so people can contact you directly who
Sorry.
don't have it.
No, sorry.
No, you're right. No, sorry,
Mhm.
necessary.
This is confusing.
Just make sure it's to everyone and just put your email. And of course, you've got my email address. If you need it, I can pass it on. I was just going to share. Okay. Share the slide. Now, of course, we've just had Dana's wonderful talk. The next one will be just over 3 months, early in July. I have far too many presentations actually in the month of June to make it every 3 months. So I will let everyone know of that in July. I've also, as I said, these lectures are being recorded. There is actually the lecture series that is already online in YouTube, and this one that's been recorded today will be added. You'll also find in YouTube my symposium that we had at the end of January. The majority of papers have actually been recorded and presented there as well. So that is going to be updated with Dana's presentation in the very near future. I will send out like an email letting everyone know. Just checking if there's any. Thanks for that. We've got your email address. Well, has anybody got any last questions before we let Dana continue with her day? I can just see the cat's tail just popped in. Well behaved. Well behaved right to this point. There's two new messages. Okay, you've put the articles. Oh, Arthur's actually
Yes.
updated your articles for you. Yeah, that's wonderful. So thank you everybody for joining us today for this online lecture. Wish you a happy rest of the day and very productive. Thank everyone. Maybe put your hands together one last time for Dana. Thank you so much for sharing your very inspirational research. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Dana.